השיחה שאתם עומדים לשמוע ממש מרגשת אותי, והסיבה המרכזית היא שקודם כל אני מכיר את החוקרת כבר 15 שנה מאז שהיא הרצתה בטד בפעם הראשונה, וכבר אז היא הפכה לי את הראש עם המחקר המדהים שלה, וניסיתי לתאם איתה המון המון זמן, לקח יותר משנתיים עד שבסוף הצלחנו לתאם, היא מאוד מאוד עסוקה, קוראים לה פרופסור אליזבת לופטוס, והיא אחת מחוקרות הזיכרון החשובות ביותר בעולם. פשוט ככה, אין דרך אחרת לתאר את זה. עכשיו, מה מיוחד אצל גברת אליזבת? רוב האנשים כאשר הם חוקרים זיכרון, או כאשר אנחנו מדברים על זיכרון, בעצם אנחנו מתייחסים לאיך אנחנו שוכחים דברים שקרו, נכון? איך אפשר לזכור יותר טוב דברים שקרו? אבל גברת לופטוס חוקרת משהו אחר לגמרי. היא חוקרת איך אנחנו זוכרים דברים שלא קרו. איך אפשר לשחק עם הזיכרון האנושי ולהשתיל זיכרונות בצורה שבן אדם יכול לזכור משהו בצורה לגמרי אמיתית, כמו ששכחו אותו לבד בקניון, או כל מיני דברים אחרים, למרות שזה לא קרה. ולכן, בגלל שהעבודה הזאת היא כל כך חשובה, יוצא לה להעיד הרבה פעמים במשפטים, כאשר הקורבן זוכר דברים שלא קרו. אני חושב שאחת מהעבודות המפורסמות ביותר שלה, זה איך אנשים משחזרים לצורך העניין תאונות דרכים. אז מה שקורה בעבודה הזאת זה מאוד מעניין. מראים לאנשים סרטון שבו שתי מכוניות מתנגשות אחת בשנייה, אוקיי? לקבוצה אחת בעצם שואלים באיזה מהירויות היו המכוניות כאשר הם התרסקו אחת על השנייה, או אם אתם רוצים, כאשר הם smashed. והקבוצה השנייה, עם אותו סרטון, שואלים אותם באיזה מהירות לפי דעתכם היו המכוניות כאשר הם נגעו, קולייד, כן? כאשר הם נגעו אחת בשנייה. ובצורה מאוד מאוד מעניינת, למרות ששתי הקבוצות רואות את אותו סרטון, הקבוצה ששואלים אותה באיזה מהירויות היו המכוניות כאשר הם התרסקו, אומרת שהם היו במהירויות גבוהות יותר, כי כדי להתרסק אתה צריך להיות במהירות גבוהה יותר. ואותה קבוצה ששואלים אותה באיזה מהירות היו מכוניות כשהם נגעו אחת בשנייה, אומרת מהירות נמוכה יותר. אבל אז הם ממשיכים ושואלים האם ראית זכוכית שבורה? למרות שלא הייתה זכוכית שבורה בסרטון, אותם אנשים שאמרו מהירות גבוהה יותר, כי שאלו אותם לגבי סמש, תתרסקו, אומרים שהייתה זכוכית שבורה בתאונה ובסרטון, למרות שזה לא קרה, והם יכולים להעיד בבית דין שהיה, לזה חירטוט מחורטט. אז דיברנו על איך פועל הזיכרון האנושי, איך זה קורה, איך זה קשור למשפטים על פגיעות מיניות, ויותר, אולי הדבר הכי מעניין, איך זה קשור ל-AI, האם העובדה ש-AI זוכר דברים שלא קרה, או מה שנקרא עושה הלוצינציות, בעצם זה בגלל שהזיכרון של בינה מלאכותית מאוד דומה לזיכרון האנושי. אז בואו נתחיל עם אליזבת לופטוס. הסרטון הוא באנגלית, אבל יש כתוביות. אם אתם אוהבים את מה שאנחנו עושים, לפני שהסרטון מתחיל, אתם מוזמנים קודם כל להירשם לערוץ, ללחוץ על הפעמון. אתם מוזמנים להיות החברים שלנו גם בטלגרם ובוואטסאפ, כדי לדעת מתי אני מעלה סרטונים חדשים. אם אתם רוצים לתמוך בעשייה המבורכת שלנו, להיות שותפים, אתם יכולים לעשות את זה גם דרך כפתור הסופר תודה, זה מאוד עוזר לנו, גם דרך הפטריון וגם לקנות קורסים של בינה מלאכותית והצלחה בלימודים. כל הפרטים נמצאים בתיאור הסרטון, ועכשיו פרופסור אליזבת לופטוס. Professor Elizabeth Loftus, thank you so much for coming today. How are you?
I'm good. My pleasure.
Actually, it is my pleasure. Now I must start with an introductory level question. Have you ever been in Israel?
Many times. Many times. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to Tel Aviv. I've been to Haifa. I received an honorary doctorate from the university there. So I've got connections.
Okay, but unfortunately we cannot conduct this interview in Hebrew.
No, we can't. Sorry.
Okay, but you do remember something, and the subject of our conversation today is about memory. So let's start with a very simple question. For someone new to the memory science, if memory isn't like a video camera, what single metaphor best capture how it really works? And which popular metaphor would you set aside because it misleads courts and the public?
First of all, I'd say that memory, as you indicated, doesn't work like a recording device. We don't just record the event and play it back later. The process is much more complex. When we try to recall something, we're actually bringing together bits and pieces of experience, sometimes pieces that happened at different times and places, and we're essentially constructing a memory. And that's why we as psychologists talk about the constructive or reconstructive nature of memory. And I don't know what the best metaphor is. A recent one that I kind of like is, it's a little bit more like a Wikipedia page, because you can go in there and you can edit it, but so can other people.
Oh, very nice. So the memory is like a Wikipedia page when someone else can edit it for you, sometimes even without you knowing that the same page was edited. But unlike Wikipedia page, you cannot go to the log page and see who changes what.
Well, that's true. In that way, it's different from Wikipedia. But with the human mind, when somebody else is editing your memory for you, you're often completely unaware of it. And it's not particularly easy to discover the source of that contamination.
And you know, I always tell my kids that the opposite of truth is not lying. If you're not telling the truth, sometimes you make mistakes. So people, and I think that you can see it throughout your work many, many times, when they don't say the truth, when they don't recall what exactly happened, like in a video camera scenario, it doesn't mean they are actually lying, because lying is very, very different from not telling the truth. Could you please elaborate on the distinction?
Sure. When somebody says something that isn't accurate, they could either be deliberately lying, which means they're actively trying to deceive you and they're saying something that they know isn't true. And there are many psychologists who study this kind of deliberate lying and deception. But what I study is people who are led, often through suggestion, to believe and remember things that didn't happen. And when they say these things that are wrong, they truly believe in what they're saying. They can be very detailed and confident about it, even though it never really happened, or it never really happened in quite that way.
Now, how does what you just told me relate to the concept of confabulation in psychology? Because basically, if the term is, if you're unfamiliar with the term, I'm addressing my audience here. Sometimes when a small child is lying, we are not saying he's lying. He's confabulates. So basically, he lies, but he believes what he says. So how do you see the difference, or not the difference, between confabulation as a psychology construct and what you do in your own work?
Well, the place where I've seen confabulation used frequently is sometimes in the medical world, where you have some patients with brain damage and they start to report really, really wild things. Like they may say that this person is their son, and you say, well, how can he be your son when you're 35 and this person is 30? And then they'll say something like, well, I adopted him. They're trying to make sense, and they come up with some explanation to make sense, and who knows if they believe it or not. But confabulation is just constructing something that isn't true, and that's very similar to what I study. Although I study it in people who are normal and healthy, and they are led to remember details that are different from the way things really happen, or they're even led to have entire memories for something that never occurred.
And again, for the sake of our discussion, the truth is what you have seen if you have put a video camera in the scenario. This is what we call the truth. Would you agree?
Well, in some of those cases, yes. I mean, in some of my work, we actually show people a simulated crime or a simulated accident and try to distort their memory. And we succeed at distorting what they remember, but we know what the truth is. When we do these other studies where we plant entire memories into the minds of otherwise ordinary, healthy people, well, there is no underlying truth. We've completely made up the memory and fed it to someone who fell for the suggestion.
Okay, this is so cool and so funny. Let's move on to the next question. In your opinion, where does human memory perform best and where is predictably fragile? So could you please offer like practical do's and don'ts that juries, journalists, police, and family can use to improve recall and avoid false memories?
First of all, I do want to emphasize that my whole scientific program of research all these decades has been on how it is that people come to remember things that didn't happen. But it's part of a larger field of memory. It's a major subfield in the field of psychology, the study of human memory. There are courses in colleges on human memory. There are textbooks on human memory, and they would cover the topic that you're interested in. What can we do in everyday life to improve our memory?
No, but
we know.
I am sorry, but I think that your distinction is very important. When you study memory, you can study memory in two separate branches. One is how to not forget something that you want to remember, and this is not what you're doing. And what you're doing is how some people sometimes remember what didn't happen. Okay? So there are two things of false memories. One that you remember something that didn't happen, and one that you didn't remember something that did happen. Okay? But my question is, regarding the do's and don'ts, do you have any practical tip in order not to remember something that didn't happen? Not how to remember more. It's not a Harry Lorraine tip.
Well, there are a couple of tips. So, for example, in some banks, which are at high risk maybe for having a bank robbery, the bank tellers get trained. If somebody comes in and robs you, sit down, write out everything you can remember before you talk to anybody else, before anybody comes to interview you. And so that rehearsal of that information, committing it in writing as a document, will sometimes protect the memory to some extent from further contamination. That's an example of a tip. But I'll give you another one that I think is important to people in everyday life, and that because I hear from people, my big problem with memory is I'll go to a conference or I'll go to a cocktail party, I'll meet somebody, they'll introduce themselves, and then right away I forget the name, and it's kind of embarrassing because when I see them again, I'd love to be able to remember their name. Well, we've got tips for that. It doesn't take a PhD to know that if you rehearse the information, you might be able to commit it to memory. But what should that rehearsal look like? If I meet somebody named Bill, should I say Bill, 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 Bill? That's called mass rehearsal, repeating it over and over all at once. That's not so good as if you space out the rehearsal. Well, what should the spacing look like? Should I say Bill every 5 minutes for maybe a half hour? Is that the best way to do it? That even spacing? No, it's not.
You need spaced repetition, like the work of Ebbinghaus.
Well, of course, Ebbinghaus he looked at the forgetting curve, but he wasn't talking about spaced rehearsal. That's something that's a little newer in the memory field. And the best way to remember Bill's name, the name Bill, you just met at a conference or a party or wherever, is, you say it right away, to even just say it to yourself, then wait another 5 minutes, say it to yourself again, Bill, then maybe wait 15 minutes, say it again. Now wait an hour, say it again. That expanding pattern of rehearsal is, we've found, the best pattern to increase the likelihood that name gets into your long-term memory.
And can I say that I'm performing spaced repetition and I repeat the name in a spaced, in a larger and larger spaces? Does it also mean that if someone else try to inject false memory or to alter with my memory, if the memory is well repeated in my mind, it will be much harder for the other external person to tamper with my memory.
Right, because you'd strengthen the memory, and it's those weak memories that are more susceptible to contamination. So memories get weakened because a lot of time passes, but memories could be strengthened through rehearsal and protect them to some extent.
Okay, so I think with that in mind, let's go back to your original paper with John Palmer. Now, in this paper, I think I have it over here. Let's say I want to read from the abstract. Two experiments are reported in which subjects view films of automobile accident and then answered question about events occurring in the films. The question about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other uh, elicited higher estimate of speed than question which use the verb collided, bumper, conducted, or hit in place of smashed. So my first question, and this is a question that I always ask my scholar guests, how did you come up with this brilliant idea? If you can recall and you don't have false memories.
Well, you're asking me to remember something that is maybe a half a century ago. I finished graduate school, and during my years in graduate school, I had been doing some very theoretical work on memory. I continued to do that work on semantic memory, memory for your knowledge of the world. But I really wanted to study something that had more practical applicability. So I knew something about memory. I was always interested in legal cases and legal issues. Why don't I look at the memory of witnesses to crimes and accidents and other critical events? But what aspect should I look at? Because there's so many things that can affect the accuracy of that kind of memory. Should I look at how good the lighting is or how much time has passed? And I decided to look at the questioning process. What happens when you question people about their experience in different ways? And that's basically how I ended up coming up with the idea. Let's change the wording of a question that you put to a witness and see how it affects the answer that people give. And I began working on that particular study with John Palmer, who happened to be an undergraduate. I believe he was an honors student at the university where I was teaching. And we did those experiments. Excuse me. I was working with John Palmer. He was a undergraduate. I think he was an honors student where I had been teaching. And we did those experiments.
Wow. It's like, it's a fundamental paper in the world of psychology. It's like magical number 7 plus minus 2. And you have the ability to recall and say, okay, we used to do that. We used to do that. When you wrote this article, it wasn't fundamental yet. So the idea of looking into this paper like half a century after and say, wow, this paper basically changed what we know about false memory. It just, give you like a awe. Now, my question regarding this paper, what, if anything, about that findings, from 74 as generalized to today higher fidelity video world, and where does it still bite us in courts?
Well, first of all, what we showed in that paper is just changing a word or two in a question can significantly affect the answer somebody gave. So they tell you the cars are going faster when they had the accident if you use the word smashed than if you use the word hit. But another important aspect of that study was the finding that there was a long range effect. If I ask you the smash question and I come back to you a week later and say, by the way, that accident you saw last week, did you see any broken glass? People were more likely to tell us they saw broken glass that did not exist if we'd used the word smashed than if we had used the word hit. So what that meant is that these leading questions were having a long range effect. They were affecting the answer to a completely different question that you put to a witness, often much later. They were affecting the witness's memory. And now we have lots and lots of studies out there that demonstrate the power of not only leading questions, but other forms of suggestive information, the power of it to contaminate memory.
So again, I think what you said is extremely important. It's not just the speed of the car when you say smashed versus collided, because if you say smashed, the probability of people to witness broken glass will be much higher, which basically means that you don't remember what happens or what happened. You remember what you remember what happened, and you remember what you remember what you remember what happened. And with the memory of your memory, one can very easily tamper with. And my question is, I think that, you know, that lawyers or very sophisticated lawyers can harness what you just find and say, oh, this is how can I make witnesses, make a witness to be look like he is lying. So what can we do in order to prevent sophisticated lawyers from using the findings that you have in order to, okay, I know that this witness didn't exactly say what happened, but he didn't lie, and he did remember somehow. Or
well, what you're asking me is reminding me of something after I had done a few of these experiments, showing that changing a word or two in your question can get people to say they remember things that didn't happen. We talked about the example with the smash question versus hit, leading people to be more likely to claim they saw non-existent broken glass. You ask people, did you see the broken headlight? They're more likely to say yes than if you ask the same question with the indefinite article, did you see a broken headlight? These are just a few examples that come straight from the scientific work. And when I used to give talks about this work early on, I got very different reactions. Sometimes I'd be talking in a law school to law students, and the law students would come up to me afterwards saying, isn't it a little dangerous for you to be talking about this, because I'm training lawyers on how to ask questions to best help their client. And maybe they'll want to deliberately manipulate a witness that they're interviewing in order to help their client. Isn't this dangerous? That was the concern of these law students. But I could give the same talk to a group of practicing lawyers, and they'd come up and ask me, is there an article somewhere that lists all the words and which words are more powerful than which others? So they wanted to know where they could make use of this information. In the legal system, of course, many the people we have to worry about is the people who are asking the questions when they're not being recorded. What's happening in the courtroom is being recorded. So people can go back, they can look at the transcript, they can see if somebody's been asking a leading question. There are rules about when you can ask one or not. But when the police are doing their interviews after a crime or accident, they're often not being recorded. And so they can do things even unwittingly that can influence the testimony that they are getting from someone.
Again, and I think the important word from your last sentence is even unwillingly. So maybe if a police officer is investigating someone, a suspect, and the police officer is more than want, to get a admission or something like this, he maybe unwillingly steer the suspect through those misleading or leading words, and we don't have any track of it whatsoever. So again, my question stays, how does the US legal system different from before 74 and after 74, if it is any different at all?
Well, first of all, there's been a great push to record all interviews of suspects, for example, to be sure that the person conducting the interview with a suspect is not doing something that is coercive or misleading in some way. I don't know about Israel, but actually here in the United States, it's okay for people to lie to a suspect in order to try to get a confession. It's okay for an interviewer to say, we found your fingerprints at the scene, or another witness saw you, or you've been identified, or even when it's not true. They hope to get a confession out of someone, and sometimes they get a coerced confession. Because when you supply someone with misinformation, a complete lie, another witness saw you do this, it acts like post-event information. It acts like information that can contaminate.
But according to Christianity, the process of questionnaire basically says that if you are innocent, God will give you the power to bear all the tortures. But we know from reality that even God doesn't give you the power or the strength to face all the tortures in the questionnaire process. So I don't want to put the border where does like a torturing a suspect to confess is legal and manipulate him through words is not good or is good, but I think that this is an open question to debate. And with your permission, I would like to go and to move on. First, could you please elaborate on the lost in the mall paradigm? And then I will ask you further question regarding this concept.
Sure. Well, after I had been doing these studies of misinformation and the power of leading questions and other kinds of misinformation to contaminate or transform somebody's memory, because of my involvement in a kind of a wild murder case, I ended up asking the question, just how far can you go with people? Could you do more than change somebody's memory for a detail? Could you actually plant an entire memory into the mind of someone for something that didn't happen? I wanted to be able to do this so I could study the process by which I thought this was happening in some actual court cases, where people were remembering entire events, not just a little detail that was different. But there's a question of what kind of study to do, because even in the name of science, we just can't go out there and do whatever we want to people.
You need to be ethical.
I didn't think I would be able to get a permission to conduct a study where I was trying to make people remember that their father killed someone, or that a relative of theirs forced them into satanic rituals and made them kill babies.
Because
I needed an analog, and our very first study was designed to see if you could get people to believe and remember that when they were 5 or 6 years old, they were lost in a shopping mall for an extended time. They were frightened, crying, ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And we found with just a few suggestive interviews, the power of suggestion, we could get about a quarter of our sample to remember all or part of this made-up event. So that was the beginning of a string of studies that are sometimes called the lost in the mall type studies, where people remembered entire events: being attacked by an animal, committing a crime, having an accident at a family wedding, witnessing a person being demonically possessed. These entire events have been planted into the minds of people when the events never happened.
And it's not just the details, like the broken glass in the 74 paper, or the cars smashed one another in that speed or that speed. We are talking about a whole new memory. And the process wasn't, on the face of it, wasn't hypnosis. It wasn't like a deep induction, you are asleep. No, just suggesting during normal, plausible discussion or conversation. Am I right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, in the original Lost in the Mall study, we just said to our research participant, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Roy?
Yes.
Is it Roy? Well, we've had a chance to talk to your mother, and she told us some things that happened to you when you were about 5 or 6, and we just want to ask you about these experiences. And if you don't remember what your mother told us, then just say, I don't remember. And we would feed you some true memories, things your mother told us really did happen to you when you were a little kid. And then with your mother's help, we would construct a completely fake scenario about how you and the family were at a shopping mall. You got lost in a particular place. You were ultimately found. You were crying. An elderly person found you and brought you back together with the family. And we've fed these scenarios to you as if they were all true, as if we had learned them all from your mother. And after that process, that was the basic original method we used to plant those original Lost in the Mall memories.
Now, in the original Lost in the Mall, even in the later consecutive research following it, what are the clearest boundary conditions, like age, delay, plausibility, social pressure, beyond which implementation rates drop to near zero?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring about an implantation dropping to zero, but
like when
because
when you can't implement or you can't inject a false memory, like after a person is I don't know, older than 50, or the delay is, or the social pressure is different, people from higher class interviewing people from lower class, etc. Did you find any boundary conditions at all to the Lost in the Mall?
Well, there are certain things that we know, if we try to plant something that happened a really long time ago, it's easier than if I want to plant something that happened a week ago. But I'm not quite sure the best way to answer this. There were a group of scientists who got together and did a big mega analysis. They were from Canada, the US, and Britain. And they pulled together a whole bunch of these very rich false memory studies. Those studies all planted something different. And they were coded in different ways, classified according to did it succeed in planting a memory or not. So this group of researchers used a common coding scheme, and they asked, how often are people falling for this on average? And their answer was about 30% of the time people developed a false memory with this powerful suggestive technique. But an additional 23% of the time they developed a belief that the event had happened, even though they didn't have this sense of recollection. Now, I think that's very important, because sometimes just getting convinced that something happened to you, even without actually feeling like you're recalling it, is that first step down that royal road to getting a false memory.
Now, in the Wikipedia page of Lost in the Mall technique, in the section of criticism, some critics, some people, or some scholars argue that the Lost in the Mall technique or experiment is not generalizable to memories for traumatic events, okay? So, and I'm sure that you are familiar with this critique. How do you address this critique?
Well, let me just say that there are people who are very unhappy with these findings. And it's like the findings kind of live in their head, and they look for any which way they can attack the findings. And they try to bat down the false memory rate. So if I tell you there was a mega-analysis where 30% of the people developed a false memory that something happened, they try to bat it down and to show that they think many of those weren't really false memories. They think that the people who speak out on this, I and others, are exaggerating the problem. But they do analyses that, and it's really getting into the weeds, that in some cases are ridiculous. And in their staunch effort, in their insecurity, in their discomfort with this work. So while I like Wikipedia and it's very helpful, you should keep in mind that when there's a controversial topic like that, other people are going in there to edit those pages and trying to make themselves feel better.
And again, the human memory is like Wikipedia, but you know who edited what. So let's move on from the lost in the mall, which is a negative memory, to like a positive asparagus childhood memory. So you can basically do the same thing. There is a paper from 2008, which is called Asparagus, a Love Story. And are you familiar with this work?
Well, yeah, that's one of my papers. So I'm
okay,
very familiar. Okay.
No,
so,
okay.
So you want the background, or you want to say a little more context?
Yeah. So because I think that what we can say right now is that the same technique for negative memories as lost in the mall can be implemented for positive memories, and then we can take or harness your findings to, health education paradigms in television. So please elaborate on the Asparagus Love Story, which is a great paper.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Okay. Well, I'll tell you the story there. So I moved to my new university, I don't know, a little over 20 years ago. I'm at the University of California, Irvine. And with my postdoc and then graduate students, what we wanted to look at was the repercussions of having a false memory. If I plant a false memory in your mind, does it affect your later thoughts, your later intentions, or even your later behavior? And we decided to study this by planting a false memory that as a child you got sick eating a particular food. So for some people, we planted a false memory you got sick eating eggs, or for others, pickles, or for others, strawberry ice cream. And what we found is that people weren't that interested in eating those foods once they developed a false belief or a false memory. So we had then shown, yes, there are repercussions. Later on, they don't want to eat the food as much. And we then asked ourselves, well, could you do the opposite? Could you plant a warm, fuzzy memory about a healthy food like asparagus, as we pronounce it here in the US? And maybe you'll make people want to eat more asparagus. And that's what we did. We planted a warm, fuzzy memory about asparagus, and people were more interested in eating asparagus. And we've also shown that if you put foods in front of people later on and give them an opportunity to choose what they want to eat, after they've developed a false memory, if it's a bad one, they don't eat they're less likely to eat the offending food. So I remember when the New York Times wrote about this research, they called it the false memory diet. Maybe this is a way, planting a false memory and affecting people's nutritional selection, maybe making a dent in the obesity problem in our society. If we could get people to avoid fattening foods and choose healthy foods by this mental manipulation, would that be a good idea? We just raise that as a possibility.
So let me ask you specifically that bluntly. If just for the sake of our discussion, if public health agencies ask you to design a memory-based intervention, okay, just based on your findings in Asparagus, a Love Story, what would you advise them?
Well, I'd have to think about actually how you would do that, and because these studies do involve deception. we're gathering data from people and telling them that their data have been analyzed and that the really smart computer program determined that they had these experiences. So we are giving them some misinformation. But if somebody said it was okay to deceive people because it was going to be for their own good and allow them to live a healthier life and, reduce their chances of getting diabetes and heart issues and a shortened lifespan and all the things that can go with obesity and unhealthy eating, I could figure out some ways to do that based on the experiments that we've done and put out there in the literature. I don't want to design it right this minute because I have to think about the nuances.
No. Okay,
yeah,
so
okay.
With your permission, let me ask a follow-up question that you don't have to design your experiment before. What empirical criteria would you require before deployment?
Well,
and I think that you can answer this before you
can
before you construct your experiment.
You mean before I was going to try it out on a particular person?
What is, in your opinion, of course, the empirical criteria for such an intervention to say, yes, this intervention worked or this intervention didn't work?
Well, I mean, when you're doing scientific work in a college or university setting, you design an experiment that you think will work, and then you present it to a human subjects review committee to get permission to do it. And they say, okay, we give you permission. We've analyzed your proposal. We don't think it's going to be harmful to anyone. We're giving you permission to do it. That's what happens when you're doing the scientific work. But
I think that what I meant, like the p-value, okay? We need the p-value. What is the size of the p-value? But what I meant is maybe the criteria for p-value is more suitable for academic papers. And when we talk about, health agencies intervention, we need to take another criteria for, okay, does it work? And not just the p-value.
Well, I'm not sure. I think if there is an intervention that can help people be healthier and it can collectively improve things, even in a small amount, a statistically significant, but a small amount. I mean, if you could reduce lung cancer from 5% of people who smoke getting lung cancer to 4%, that could make a really big difference in society, even if it's only 1%.
Yes. But again, we have also like the concept of how can we manipulate, or how far a society can manipulate. But again, this is an open for further later on debates. Now, I think.
Well, can I just add to that, Roy? I mean, I mean, I'm a memory scientist. I'm going to tell you what can work.
You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I had a conversation recently with a scholar who found a way to increase the lifespan of mice with like 30%. And this method is applicable to human beings as well. So I asked him, is this good at all, that all people will live 30% longer? And he said, I have no idea. I'm just the scientist of the biology. I have no idea whatsoever if it's good. Okay? So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, no, because it's up to the citizens to decide. And maybe it's up to the people to choose. I want to live 30 more years. I want to be 120 when I die. And other people say, no thanks, because everybody around me will be dead. Who I love. I mean.
Okay. Now, Mike, I have a personal question. It's not just, I think it's not too personal, but if you don't want to answer, please feel free. You have consulted or testified in hundreds of cases, including like many superstar cases in the US court. What's your current rule when you will decline to testify? Okay, say, no, I'm not going to testify in this specific case. Or that you don't have a rule. You say, if I'm invited as a scholar, as an expert, I will come.
Well, I'm happy to answer that question because I get calls or contact every other day. And so obviously I have a full-time job at the university. I'm busy. And so I'm off mostly giving cases away, try to learn a little bit about what the need is of the person so that I can direct them to another expert who's maybe geographically closer to them and who, or an expert who is more of a specialist in what they're looking for. And I take it. So when do I decide to take a case? Sometimes because it's kind of a fascinating case and it's in the news, and it is kind of interesting to be able to work on a case that everybody is talking about, because you get to see the police reports and you get to see the medical records and you get to see all kinds of things when the rest of the world only sees the media coverage. And so they often don't know. They often just assume somebody is fully guilty without realizing how complicated the case is. And so it is sometimes kind of fun. But as long as we're here talking, I will tell you that I spent a long time trying to decide whether I should agree to testify in the trial of John Demjanjuk, who was accused of being the operator of the gas chambers at the Treblinka concentration camp during World War II. And it was a very, very difficult decision for me. If he was innocent, maybe I should go ahead and do that. Wasn't that the consistent thing? Possibly. But what if he was guilty and I were to do anything to help him get off? And I had family members who were extremely upset at the prospect that I would be involved in this case. I spent months investigating this situation and finally decided, I don't need to be consistent. I can find them another expert. I can find them a really good expert who can do just what I could do. And it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be me. And that's exactly what I did in the Demjanjuk case that was tried in Jerusalem some time ago. So that's one case that just gave me great difficulty in finally deciding it doesn't have to be me.
But basically, first of all, very interesting what you just said. And the Israeli lawyer of Demjanjuk, Yoram Sheftel, I think, still convinced that the person that he was his lawyer was not the evil Ivan, the great Demjanjuk from the gas chambers. This is one thing. And maybe can I assume that when Elizabeth Loftus is brought to the court, it is usually, and I say it with caution, against the victim and for the suspect. Or this is like the I don't know. How you say, Monique?
I get your question.
This is your reputation, that Elizabeth Loftus is for the suspects and not for the victims.
Well, it's true that in the criminal cases that I've been only asked by the prosecution to consult on a case maybe 5 or 6 times and only testified once for the prosecution. All the other criminal cases, I've testified on behalf of the defense or behalf of the person who's accused. And that is because it's usually the prosecution who has the witness whose memory is being disputed. And so they're not really interested, except in an unusual kind of case, in having somebody who worries about errors in memory and the problems of memory that come and help them or consult with them on the case. But I'm presenting scientific information in these cases, and it's usually the defense that wants that information.
And now I have another question regarding the Taus versus Loftus from 2007 case. Now, first, is it okay to ask about this incident, Taus versus Loftus?
Well, you're talking about a court case that has a long,
Yes.
sordid history.
Yes. So before I ask, even can I ask about this specific court case?
Sure.
Okay. So again, I have a question, but before, could you please elaborate what it is a very famous case, Taus versus Loftus, and what was your role in this case? And this case got to the Supreme Court of California, so it is not a trivial case. This was a very important legal case.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm going to have to take you back to the late 1990s. By that time, many people were claiming that they had been traumatized as children. They, for example, raped for 10 years, that they'd repressed their memories, and now the memories were back, and they got their family members prosecuted, or they filed civil cases based on this claim of massive repression. Lots and lots of innocent people got snared up in these claims of repressed memory. And when I analyzed the literature on and the supposed support for this idea of massive repression, there was no credible scientific support. And then one day, a psychiatrist comes along and he says, I have the new proof of repressed memory. I was involved in interviewing a little girl, and when she was 5 or 6 years old, she said her mother molested her. The mother lost custody and visitation, in part due to the psychiatrist's blessing of the abuse story. And then many years later, the psychiatrist came back and interviewed the girl. She's now grown up. And on videotape, she has trouble remembering. And then she remembers the accusation against her mother. So he presents this evidence. He presents it at conferences. It's the new proof of repressed memory. He writes a big article about it. And I thought this whole thing was so fishy. But how are you going to get to the bottom of it? Because he anonymized her. She was Jane Doe. It was mom's town, dad's town. So he writes his article. He uses anonymity. But one day I cracked the anonymity of this case history. I found the Doe family. And once I found the family, I was able to get into the legal records, into the court records, and I became pretty convinced that this mother had been falsely accused and wrongly lost custody and visitation of her little 6-year-old daughter. And when Jane Doe, whose real name ends up being Nicole, found out that I was looking into her case, she complained about me at my former university, and then she filed the lawsuit. And interestingly, even though I hadn't named her, she named herself in the lawsuit. So her name is Nicole Taus, and she sued me, and she sued my co-author. She sued the magazine where we published our expose. She sued other defendants. And that resulted in the litigation that you're talking about that ultimately went all the way through the California Supreme Court.
And I think my question is regarding what you just said, what is, or in retrospect, what you said or what you did was immensely important because, again, the mother was falsely accused. And again, people, and just like you said, people, where they said, yes, I was raped as a kid and I have repressed memories and no one can prove anything. And I think this also relates to the concept of the entire Me Too movement, that people say, yes, someone touched me, I don't know when. And his basically entire career can just fall apart. But how do you manage between the privacy of the victims and the suspect and the important work that you conducted in this case? Or we don't need privacy where the stakes are extremely high? In retrospect, what would you suggest the courts?
Well, it depends on what a person who's making an accusation does with their accusation. If they talk about it in the privacy of a therapy session and they try to figure out what's going on with them, and maybe you don't do anything, but once they file a lawsuit, once they allow their story to be told by somebody, allow their videotape to be shown at professional conferences, allow their story to be written about and commented on, then I think that the rest of the world has a right to investigate, to see if this is real or if we're being misled.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Now, my last, I would say, professional questions deals with AI and large language models. Many people say that large language models made up stuff or hallucinating. And Jeff Hinton said, listen, they are the memory process of large language models are extremely similar to the memory process of human beings. And just like human beings sometimes remember things that didn't happen, the same thing goes with large language models. And Jeff Hinton is a serious guy. Okay?
I know him. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, he's a cognitive psychologist, so we're in the same field,
Yes.
except he has a Nobel Prize.
Yes,
and we don't.
He has a Nobel Prize in physics. He has a Nobel Prize in physics.
Well, that's because we don't have one in psychology. That's why Danny Kahneman had to get his in economics.
Okay. So my question, you surely play with ChatGPT, and you know about the ChatGPT or large language models hallucinations. Would you say, would you agree with Jeff Hinton's theory that hallucination is just like false memories?
I don't know if I want to agree or not agree with that. I know he's been a voice of concern and caution and a little worry about how fast this is moving. But I do have a little bit of experience, and if I just stick to my own lane, I will tell you that just a few years ago, I went to MIT, to the Media Lab, and I gave a talk about a lot of the work that you and I have been talking about here, my work on the malleability of memory and how post-event misinformation can contaminate memory. And what this led to was a very, very exciting collaboration with some of the Media Lab members, particularly those who are working in Patty Mays's research group. And we have recently published a couple of papers on large language models or AI editing and human memory. And one of the things, in one of those studies, for example, you take an image. So let's say you see an image of a man and a woman talking, and she's not smiling. She's not looking very happy. And you can ask AI to take this image and edit it so that she's smiling and she looks happy, or to make a video of them interacting with her smiling and looking happy. And when people who have seen the original image are then exposed to the AI alterations, that's what they remember originally seeing. So why is that important? Because we're posting images all the time on social media, and we and others can take those images, alter them, repost them, reshare them, and alter people's memories for what they actually experienced. And AI is a big tool for being able to do that, and it's now getting in the hands of more and more people.
And can you also alter the memories of an AI system? Can you just tamper with the memories of ChatGPT in order yes, I remember. Can you get ChatGPT to write, yes, I remember what happened, even though it didn't happen?
Well, I mean, there you've got to ask the AI. Go talk to Jeff again, or talk to the Media Lab people, and see what they have to say about that.
Wow, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time, and in your opinion, how does like the future of memory research now with Elon Musk, Neuralink, and with our new understanding of the human brain is going to be in the next 20 years?
Oh, I think we have a lot of things to worry about with technology being a tool that will be in the hands of so many people, and giving so many people the capability of manipulating so many others through social media that we're going to have to figure out, I think, how to regulate that, when we should make something, a crime, or punish that kind of behavior when it really harms somebody, like we do with revenge porn or some kind of manipulation along those lines.
And again, memory is one of the most fascinating topics in psychology. There was a book a few years ago that came out, Opening Skinner Box by Lawrence Latter. And this book encapsulated 10 of the world's greatest psychology experiments of the 20th century. And not one, and not two, and not three dealt with the concept of memory from different aspects. So the idea of memory, I think, is so fundamental to the world of psychology, and again to our understanding of who we are, which is a crucial question now in the era of AI. Professor Elizabeth Loftus, thank you so much for your time. It was a mind-blowing conversation. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.